Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Thursday edition of All Access AM. I am Billy Embody. Thanks for joining me as we get to college football playoff prediction time, as well as a focus on Miami, Texas A&M, as the Aggies get ready to host the Hurricanes, who snuck their way in to the college football playoff bracket. Now we get our first round matchup of games this weekend. We'll break down Miami, Texas A&M, as well as get to my playoff predictions, just because there is an ACC team in there. So we'll see how far I have the Hurricanes going in the college football playoff bracket. We'll also talk with David Cunningham, managing editor of Tech Sideline today. He is going to break down the rebuild that James Franklin is leading at Virginia Tech. So really excited about having David Cunningham on the show for the first time, just bringing him in to break down how things are going with the Hokies. We've got a lot more to get to on this edition of All Access AM, and we are very appreciative of all of you who join us every single day in the chat, as well as those of you who support our sponsors. And the Thursday show, as always, presented by our friends at Horn Legend. If you want to be the hero for Christmas, I don't know if you can get it in time. I'm pretty sure you can, but make your order today and leave it up for less of a chance that it doesn't get there in time, because you have such a great selection of beautiful polos, pullovers, sports shirts, and more to bring to the table for everybody in your family, whether it be the men in your family or your friends or your work colleagues, or the ladies. There's even ladies wear at Horn Legend. So make sure you check out the pullover selection that they have. They also have the hoodie version of a lot of pullovers that you can check out. So make sure you use code PONY, that's PONY, for free shipping on your order, and they will hook it up for you. They've got some Mardi Gras and St. Patrick's Day stuff already starting to hit the shelves as well. And we appreciate our friends at Horn Legend for sponsoring the Thursday show. As we get into the college football playoff bracket, this is a bracket that I think really is favorable to the Big Ten, first and foremost, but the SEC and, of course, the ACC really take center stage this first weekend of the college football playoff, with Texas A&M hosting Miami, Oklahoma hosting Alabama, and then, of course, Oregon hosting James Madison, and Ole Miss hosting Tulane. Those last two games, the G5 opponents for the big dogs of Oregon and Ole Miss. And you can be pretty much assured that they're going to advance into the college football playoff. I would be really surprised if Oregon or Ole Miss fell to either one of those teams this weekend. But crazier things have happened, and both Oregon and Ole Miss dealing with some coaching changes, as is James Madison and Tulane. So crazy times in that respect. So what are you going to do if you're Ole Miss, if you're Oregon? Are you going to blow them out? Are you going to take care of business in that big of a way? Or are you going to be fighting for your life in the fourth quarter at home in a great environment for you and your fan base to have for this point of the season, and be on the edge of seeing your season end early? I think both of those games, we're going to see the home team handle business very, very easily. But let's get the bracket up here, and then we'll get into Miami, Texas A&M, because one thing I've learned about all of you guys who watch us on YouTube, on Twitter, and we appreciate you guys who do that, is we really start to see some moves made during the course of that 7:15 to maybe even 7:20 range AM Central Time. We're, of course, live Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 7 to 8 a.m. Central, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And when I look at the bracket, it is advantageous for us as an ACC show to talk about Miami, Texas A&M, probably around that 7:15 a.m. point. So when we look at the first round of games here, we have Ole Miss, Tulane. I like Ole Miss in this game. This is a matchup from earlier this season. Ole Miss won easily. I think Kawan Lacey, the Doak Walker Award finalist, is going to have just a massive day on Tulane. I think John Summerall has handled this exit as best he could, but this is a game that has already been played on the field. That it's like Oklahoma, Alabama. It's already been done. How does the rematch go? This game, contrary to Alabama, Oklahoma, is at the same venue. It's in Oxford. It's going to be a buzzing day in Mississippi for this historic day for that state, and it's going to be Ole Miss. I think that is going to take this one and win handedly over Tulane. I've got Ole Miss winning this one 47-20. I just think they're going to jump out on this one early and be in control from start to finish on that Tulane Green Wave team that is just losing a lot and is looking forward to the Will Hall era of keeping the momentum going at the same time in New Orleans. So I've got Ole Miss advancing to face Georgia in the college football playoff bracket. But we slip over to the other side of the bracket with Oregon, James Madison. You go all the way out to Oregon if you're James Madison for this one. And I don't see this one being close. The disparity between these two teams as far as who they've played is pretty drastic. And Oregon is a team that I think is getting healthy at the right time of year as well. And when I see Dante Moore and what he's been able to do, I'm more inclined to see Dante Moore and that Oregon offense take care of business here. But I will say it's probably going to be chilly over there from all from everything that I've heard is it's going to be quite the cold time of maybe a little precipitation, just a little nasty over there. And while James Madison is certainly used to that type of a weather kind of impacting them at times, not as rainy maybe as this one is going to be, but I expect Oregon to control the line of scrimmage and roll. I could see that one being like 38-0. I really don't see James Madison getting off the mat and scoring any points on that Oregon team. And Tosh Lupoi, as he gets ready to be the Cal head coach, going to go out with a statement in terms of playing at home. And then they will advance to play Texas Tech in that quarterfinal matchup. So when you look at the bracket, here it is, of course, on the screen. Oklahoma hosting Alabama. The winner advances to face number 1 Indiana, which is, man, that's just that's ruthless in a sense, just a sign of how the college football playoff can be so tough to advance in. And when you see these teams advance through it and you see the gauntlet that they most likely have to get through, it really is impressive. So the winner of this game advances to the Rose Bowl to face number 1 Indiana. You do have an Alabama team that has not necessarily been this, I think, dolled up belle of the ball that found its way into the SEC championship and then got beat up pretty good by the Georgia Bulldogs. I think Alabama is a limited team offensively. I think Ty Simpson and that offense has really shown the cracks in its games over the last 2 weeks, kind of similar to Texas A&M has shown cracks as a whole. Alabama has shown cracks offensively. Georgia got what it wanted against them for the most part on offense as well. So there's a defensive issue there. The good thing for the Tide is that Oklahoma's offense has not been anything to write home about. And this Oklahoma team is going to try to keep this game, I think, like a 17-7 game. I mean, it really is a game where John Mateer versus Ty Simpson can, obviously determine who wins this one. But from the standpoint of who takes care of the ball, who limits the opponent's ability to get that extra possession, to get that prime field position that allows them to maybe kick a field goal, that allows them to maybe capitalize and score a touchdown. That's going to be the difference in this ball game. And that Oklahoma defense has played so well and shown up in big moments. You think about the Tennessee game, you think about the Alabama game and what they were able to do. I like Oklahoma to get this one at home. It would not surprise me if the Alabama Crimson Tide went in there and won, but I do like Oklahoma in this one to kind of like a boa constrictor, just kind of choke out Alabama. And that's the type of game that Brent Venables and this team has played for a large part this year. I think about the Auburn game early on this year, just where they were able to kind of choke out that Auburn team that ended up not being very good. Don't get me wrong, but it is a team that is kind of built for that type of a matchup to really just dominate them in every single way. So Alabama is a 1.5 point underdog. I should have said that at times. Ole Miss favored by 17.5 over Tulane, and then Oregon favored 20.5 over James Madison. We flip over though to the Miami Texas A&M side of the bracket. Miami Texas A&M, huge matchup, obviously. 11 a.m. Central Time on Saturday morning in College Station on ABC. The Aggies hosting the Miami Hurricanes in a matchup that I think is the marquee one of the weekend, just from the standpoint of you get an SEC on ACC team, you get two teams that have a huge similar opponent or common opponent in Notre Dame. Both teams having wins over the Irish on their resume, which helped get them into the college football playoff. Obviously, Texas A&M was easily in. Miami had to campaign and politic their way into the college football playoff. They get rewarded with a trip to College Station where they have to walk in there and face that 100,000+ person crowd at Kyle Field. It's going to be an electric atmosphere at 11 a.m. College football scheduling gods, this one should have been the night game. I know you have Oregon out there on the West Coast, and it helps to put them on at 6:30 and this and that, and you can play that game in the middle of the day out west. But come on, put this one at 11 a.m. You could have put Ole Miss Tulane at 11 a.m. That would have been fine. Nobody would have cared in Oxford, Mississippi. They would have been in the Grove around 5 a.m., firing up breakfast and been happy and ready to rock. This one at night should have been the late night game for the college football playoff. Let's get into this game as I do want to break this one down more in depth for our listeners on this show. Miami heads into this game coming off a month where they played their best football. And not only did they play their best football, they played their best football in November for the first time really in the Mario Cristobal era. He entered this month really just struggling as a whole in November. He entered the month going 4-8 in his tenure as a Hurricane in November. He finishes this month, I believe, at 7-9. So he was able to finish strong, 3-1 record down the stretch. Obviously, that road trip at SMU was really a matchup that you could argue started Halloween by the team flying in on Halloween, but by the time it ended, it was November. But they really closed out well down the stretch of this season, including that dominant performance over Pitt. Carson Beck's been playing some of his best football, and that's important when I look at this game and I look at this matchup as a whole. And as we break this one down, I just see a Miami team that, as Mario Cristobal said, is walking into a maniacal scene at Kyle Field. And they are going to have to be so locked in and focused for this one game season that they have. False starts have been an issue for this Miami team. They've kind of cleaned some of that stuff up. They went into a cold weather atmosphere at Pitt and came out with a dominant win. Now they get sunny and probably 75 is my guess in Texas at Texas A&M for this weekend's matchup. I'll confirm that, but I know it's going to be beautiful here in Texas this weekend as a whole. Yeah, sunny. I shorted them. Sunny and 76. So nothing in the way of Miami having everything lined up to play at a high level. Texas A&M favored by 3.5, according to our friends at BetMGM. 48.5 is the total on this. I really like that total. I see this game being in that 24-21, 24-20, 27-20 type of a range. So kind of a not high scoring affair. I think both teams want to run the football in this playoff atmosphere. And if you get Miami to win that battle running the ball, it's going to allow Carson Beck to be at his very best, like he's kind of been at early, or not, I shouldn't say early, that he's been at his best late in this season. He's thrown one interception in the month of November, or over his last 3 games, something like that. But this is a Miami quarterback who's feeling pretty good about himself going into it, where on the contrary, Marcel Reed, has not been as explosive and hasn't really put together the best finish to the season. He wants that Texas game back. He did not play well. He wants certainly a half against South Carolina back. Wasn't able to play really well. Of course, they got the taste out of their mouth with a 48-0 win over Samford. But you look at the Texas game, 2 interceptions. South Carolina game, 2 interceptions. LSU, who has a great secondary, don't get me wrong, but 2 interceptions. Missouri was able to take care of the football and play his best game in the month of November. And that LSU game was the last weekend of October on the 25th. So really one where for Marcel Reed, as the stakes have gotten higher down the stretch, it hasn't been perfect by any means. A 3-4 touchdown to INT ratio in those 2 SEC games over the final 3 weeks of the regular season. I have concerns about where he's at as a passer right now, but Corey Heatherman and this Miami defense is going to also have to contain him. Le'Veon Moss, running back for Texas A&M, officially listed as questionable in the Wednesday night availability report. Mike Elko kind of alluding to the fact that he could end up playing. It's a wait and see thing for this Texas A&M offense. If Le'Veon Moss can go and pair with Reuben Owens, that is going to help Marcel Reed out in such a big way as far as a comfort level. Texas A&M can work to establish the run against this Miami defense, which, by the way, is going to have a lot to say about that with regards to Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, Justin Scott, and that entire group of Hurricanes and what they bring to the table, trying to shut down the running game of Texas A&M so that Miami can control the clock and that they can play their brand of football with Shannon Dawson getting the ball to Mark Fletcher and that group of running backs for Miami, so that Carson Beck can kind of, I think, try to do what maybe Oklahoma wants to do to Alabama, which is get Texas A&M in a little bit of a boa constrictor kind of feel where they're going to kind of choke them out. That's what the game plan should be, kind of shorten that game, similar to what we saw from Duke facing against Virginia in the ACC championship. Miami can play this one like they were in the ACC championship if they like, as far as trying to shorten the game on the road in a hostile environment. The way you can do that is really running the football and controlling the clock. I think Miami, the way they played SMU on the road, if you can clean up those penalties, if you can clean up that run game a little bit more, that's where you can find your way to a victory in College Station. Obviously that SMU Miami game was really close, but Miami made critical errors at critical periods that cost them, or they didn't capitalize in the red zone right before the end of the first half. Those type of things really hurt them in the end. We already know that Carson Beck has to play a clean football game. He can't have 4 interceptions like he did against Louisville. But they have had the experience of, we've made mistakes that beat us. And that's what they've cleaned up for the most part of these final few games of the regular season. And they've really flexed their muscle. And so if they can play that level of Miami football, they should be in good shape to pull the upset. And I have gone back and forth on this. I respect Kyle Field and what Texas A&M has been able to do at home this year. They've been unbeaten, but they've also played the schedule they've played. And so I'm intrigued to see Miami, which Texas A&M, talking about this Miami team, they said this is the best offense we've played this season. And I mean, you look at it, this is really a offense, for Texas A&M, to face that presents problems with guys like Malachi Toney, baby Jesus. Can he get something going? Those are all things that I think, despite Texas A&M playing in the SEC and having the schedule that they do, it was still a schedule that was kind of advantageous for them. That was one of the knocks on Texas A&M. One of their best games was against Notre Dame, and they end up winning on the road 41-40, but they gave up 40 points. It was a game that, doesn't inspire a lot of confidence against a Notre Dame team that wants to grind you down, has Jeremiah Love, has Jadarian Price, CJ Carr kind of, pulling the strings back there. Arkansas Talon Green and what he brings to the table put up 42 on this Texas A&M defense and had them sweating on the road. So we all know what South Carolina did in a half with Lenora Sellers and company. So this schedule for Texas A&M, they did not play a top 10 team when they played them outside of Notre Dame, and they played that on the road. And again, it's going to be fascinating to see when you look up and down their schedule how this Miami offense does against Texas A&M, because you can look up and down that schedule for Texas A&M, and their coaches are right. As they preview this game with Mike Elko saying that this is a Miami offense that is the best offense that we've faced, and it's skilled, it's talented, it is the most complete offense. And, Mike Elko said, I think they've got a number of kids on their team that are going to get drafted really high. So that talent level for Miami going into this game is going to be important to carry the day against this Texas A&M defense. Now, Texas A&M, they do have, I think, a little bit better as far as a linebacking core than Miami. Wesley Basaint and that crew just hasn't been able to rack up the tackles for loss, hasn't been able to rack up the game-changing plays. And why do they necessarily need to when you've got a defensive line that does what it does against the opposing offenses with guys like Ruben Bain and Justin Scott and all of those guys? But when you look at what they have an opportunity to do from a slowing down the run perspective, that is where Texas A&M is going to have their hands full. I think the chirping and the talking from Texas A&M earlier this month, as far as the kind of lack of worry for Ruben Bain, is going to come back and bite them. I think he's going to be incredibly ticked off and ready to play. And Ruben Bain, who comes in with 37 tackles, 7.5 for loss, 4.5 sacks, kind of not a drop off from the early season, but just gets so much attention and plays so hard. This is an opportunity for him to get back on to that national stage and do it at such a high level in front of the nation. I think we're in for a little bit of a defensive struggle because both of these defenses, I think, have some motivation here. They Texas A&M wants to bounce back after what Texas did to them, even though they weren't necessarily the reason why they lost against the Longhorns. Miami and what Texas A&M has said about them, I know it was just one offensive lineman, but it's still, that permeates a room, and it's probably what Corey Heatherman and this Miami staff have been talking about all week long, over the last 2 weeks, really, as far as what they're going to face in this in this Texas A&M defense, offense as a whole. So it's going to be fascinating to watch that matchup. Who wins the line of scrimmage? It's cliche. It's all of those things, but it's probably what is going to determine it. The winner of this matchup, when you look at the college football playoff bracket, does go on to face Ohio State in the next round of the college football playoff, and that game would be the Cotton Bowl Classic right in my backyard here in Dallas. And when you try to predict this game, 3.5 points, Texas A&M is favored by. I have a struggle with picking Texas A&M to win this one because of the way they played over the final month of the season. But you also have to factor in the home teams in the first round of the college football playoff last year did incredibly well taking care of business. I mean, it was well documented. They were blowouts. I'm intrigued by this matchup because I think, contrary to last year's college football playoff, in my opinion, the matchups seem a little bit more even. I think when you look at what was dished out last year and the overall matchups that we had, Texas facing Clemson. Clemson had not played well pretty much all year. They snuck their way into the ACC championship. They beat SMU. We know how that one ended. Texas took care of business. They were a much better team last year than they obviously were this year. Tennessee, Ohio State. We know the talent on that Ohio State roster. They end up going to win it all. SMU, Penn State, cold environment, 100,000. Brights were maybe too light for Brights were too bright for Kevin Jennings in that game. Throws 3 picks. We know how that one went. Otherwise, like that one would have been a halfway decent matchup if not for turnovers, which is why it's so important for Carson Beck to take care of the football. Indiana, Notre Dame, a fascinating one in that was probably the best matchup of the 2024 college football playoff bracket. And Notre Dame kind of grinds out a 27-17 win over Indiana. They were up 17-3 at the half, and it was just kind of cruise control. And now we see the next version of Indiana upgrading with Fernando Mendoza, and now they're the number 1 seed. This year, when you look at the matchups that are, let's just say, contestable, because I don't think Ole Miss and I don't think Oregon are going to be tested, you're going to have these matchups that are going to be a lot harder to see them not being good football games. Like Alabama, Oklahoma, yes, they've already played, but they're going to be a good matchup. Miami, Texas A&M, they have a common opponent that they both played really well, and they've played pretty good football for the most part this season. I think we're in for 2 really good matchups this year because of the tweak that they've had in that college football playoff seeding. So those 2 games I'm really excited about. I tend to lean Miami. As much as I picked Oklahoma to win that game against Alabama, I think we could see the road teams kind of flip it this year and maybe win those 2 games as far as Power 4 versus Power 4. So I am going to pick Miami to beat Texas A&M on the road. I think they're going to edge it out 24-20, something like that. And that Miami offense is going to make just enough plays against the Texas A&M, defense that has allowed just enough, and the Texas A&M offense hasn't answered the bell as much late this season. So on the other side of our interview with David Cunningham of Tech Sideline, we are going to break down the rest of the college football playoff bracket. But I do have Miami advancing to face Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl against the Ohio State Buckeyes. So that'll be quite the matchup if we get it as well. And we'll see how it goes. But I do want to see how it's going in Blacksburg, Virginia. And we go to our friend who is a first-time appearance on the show, David Cunningham. David, thanks so much for the time this morning. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And we're excited to talk about James Franklin, what he's got going on at Virginia Tech. Let's kind of rewind back to the decision to let go of Brent Pry, somebody who's well respected, but just didn't necessarily get it done. James Franklin had become available, kind of perfect time, perfect place for James Franklin to take his next stab at a coaching opportunity. What did you see in this coaching search that kind of led you to believe that it would be a James Franklin that would take this job and start that process of resurrecting Virginia Tech football?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll try to keep it concise. Brent Pry, who of course was James Franklin's defensive coordinator for a long time, both at Penn State and Vanderbilt. He had previous ties to Virginia Tech. It did not work out. He's a great person, but did not work out as a coach. And I think he rebuilt a lot of relationships with high school coaches and whatnot in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but didn't quite get everything across the line. Had talent in the program, couldn't quite win games. They chose to fire him in September. They don't do that. Well, then when James Franklin's fired in October, Virginia Tech can't really hop on that train. And the thing that ties all that together is that Virginia Tech has been trying to do more with less for a while. And the athletic director, Whit Babcock, went and presented to Virginia Tech's Board of Visitors, what some might call the Board of Trustees, and came up with a plan or a proposal in August, basically said, hey, look, we need more investment in athletics from the university. And in late September, after Pry was fired, that was approved. And that was one of the big reasons I think James Franklin was hired. He said as much. That was one of the reasons why he was so interested, because Virginia Tech is pouring $229 million increase over the next couple of years into this athletic department. Virginia Tech wants to step up to the plate and play big boy football now. And that's pretty crazy given that the Hokies hadn't necessarily done that before. They'd been behind the eight ball financially. And I think that really piqued James Franklin's interest. And it came down to relationships at the end of the day. His relationship with Bud Foster, Virginia Tech's legendary defensive coordinator under Frank Beamer. That was one of the big relationships that got this thing across the line. I think the stars kind of just aligned perfectly for the Hokies because they had to fire Pry when they did. Penn State had to fire Franklin when it did. And at the same time, you had to have the plan, the money in place for James Franklin. On top of that, it fits Franklin's recruiting region perfectly. He's from Pennsylvania. He loves this area of the country. So it's been a crazy whirlwind of last couple months, weeks, but Hokies finally got the job done. And yeah, there's a lot of excitement in Blacksburg.
When you see him up at the podium, getting introduced, and I thought his speech and his opening remarks to this job were so perfect, and he got emotional talking about Brent Pry, who is now his defensive coordinator at Virginia Tech. Let's go there from the opening get-go as far as the messaging that James Franklin brought to the table. And then what was the process like as far as you guys following it to start hearing about Brent Pry being the next defensive coordinator after just being the head coach, a couple months earlier?
Talk about crazy, man. I think we saw that a little bit at Mississippi State, and we've seen it here and there, maybe in the NFL once or twice, but rarely do you ever see a coach come back immediately after being fired. Usually there's a layoff or two. But that just goes to show you the relationship between James Franklin and Brent Pry. Franklin played at a quarterback at East Stroudsburg in Pennsylvania. And his offensive coordinator there was Jim Pry, Brent's dad. And Brent was also on staff as a defensive coach at the time. That's about 30 years ago. They go way back in this time machine. And they coached together at Vanderbilt, at Penn State. They've been together along the way, kept that really close relationship. And as you mentioned, Billy, he teared up talking about Brent Pry in his introductory press conference, got very emotional. My colleague Andy Bitter asked him about it after that, whether or not Brent Pry would be hired on staff. Would that even be a possibility? And he didn't deny it, but he didn't really go into any details. And I think a lot of us around here thought it could be a possibility, given that they're so close, given that Brent Pry's still around. But it's more a question of, does Brent Pry want to get back into it right away? And the answer is yeah. I've already seen Brent Pry walking around outside of the facility in the last week or two since he's been back, and we know he's been holding conversations with previous players, talking about whether or not what they want to do for next year and decisions like that. But it's pretty crazy given that he was just fired as the head coach from the school. I think it says a lot about his relationship with James Franklin, that Franklin trusts him so much to bring him back. I don't think you can undervalue that. And at the same time, it says a whole lot about Brent Pry as a person, willing to kind of put an ego and everything aside and say, you know what? I still want to coach football at this place. He really cares a lot about Virginia Tech. And Billy, I go back to when he was fired. There are a lot of people around Virginia Tech who were sad for him that it didn't work out. But there weren't many people holding hard feelings. There were a lot of people saying, man, I wish it worked out, him as a football coach. But he was such a terrific person. And I don't think you see that very often. But he and his wife tweeted something on Thanksgiving, just happy Thanksgiving to Virginia Tech fans. And he got like 600 replies on Twitter. And if you just scroll through those replies, it's Virginia Tech fans saying, thank you so much for everything you did for us. Happy Thanksgiving. We love you. It's just kind of crazy. You never see that from a fired coach. But the way James Franklin spoke about him, now he's back in the fold. It's such an interesting, unique kind of decision for him to come back. But I think it can work. He's had success as Franklin's defensive coordinator before, and he obviously knows Virginia Tech better than anyone, given he was just the Hokies head coach.
When James Franklin gets to Blacksburg and starts diving into this program and looking right after that day one press conference at what all needs to be accomplished, What do you think was at the top of his list as far as building this roster or recruiting or staff? Where did you think he started first?
Well, I think it all came back to roster management and flipping that roster. And I think that showed on signing day. Well, when he took over, the Hokies had like 8, I think, commitments in the boat. And the Hokies were like sub 115 in the recruiting rankings. And 24/7's composite rankings have Virginia Tech with the 22nd best signing class. Just pretty insane work that he did with an army of behind the scenes staffers, but no full time assistant coaches leading up to signing day. Billy, it was very interesting. He had a runway because of when he signed with the Hokies and was introduced. It came before the second to last week of the regular season, meaning the Hokies had a home game against Miami that he was able to essentially turn into a giant official visit weekend. And then when the Hokies played in Charlottesville against Virginia on rivalry weekend after Thanksgiving, he held his own official visit weekend in Blacksburg that same weekend. So he essentially got 2 giant recruiting weekends out of the final 2 weeks of the season and was able to flip a bunch of these guys. I mean, you look down the board, this is one of Virginia Tech's best ever recruiting classes, and James Franklin accomplished it in essentially 2 weeks leading up to signing day. Crazy sprint. And I think that is going to be the foundation of this roster. I think we all know how talented his Penn State coaching staff was, and he's going to bring some of those guys over, or already has. And there are some talented coaches I think that he's going to keep or is keeping, but it all starts with the players. And I think this roster wasn't talented enough. And he obviously has great recruiting ties around here. I'm interested to see what he can do with a full staff heading into the 2027 signing day cycle, because he was doing all of this in 2 weeks by himself, kind of getting everything sorted out and rushing to the finish line. When he has a kind of a longer period of time to put this class together, I'll be very curious to see what happens. But the biggest thing, Billy, I talked about the resources the Hokies were investing into their program now earlier. Well, that's going to show up come signing day, or come when the transfer portal window opens, but also on signing day, because you saw a bunch of 4-star kids from commit, whether it was flipping from Penn State or elsewhere. And I think when the transfer portal opens in January, I think you're going to see Virginia Tech be a big time name going after some big time players. And the Hokies have the resources, the funds to do that now. James Franklin knows he needs to flip this roster because, to be honest, what isn't a lot of talent at a lot of different places. There is some, look at running back, pretty good there, but a lot of the other spots on this roster, they just don't have much talent. They need better talent, and that's the tough part. So there's a long road ahead for Franklin as far as the transfer portal is concerned, but he's done pretty well so far on the recruiting trail, and that's who he is. I think anybody who watched him at Penn State knows he's a recruiter first. He loves recruiting. He loves building those relationships, and you really saw him in his element on signing day for Virginia Tech, which was really the first time since his introductory press conference that anybody got a good glimpse of him. And there he is recruiting for Virginia Tech, turning it into a top 25 class, which is pretty ridiculous. Numerous 4-stars, guys from Pennsylvania, guys from all over this area of the Mid-Atlantic. He's done a really good job just assembling this class, putting it together in such a short period of time. I don't think you can overstate that, but that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, I think. He's got a long way to go, and we'll see when the transfer portal opens.
Yeah, I am a huge James Franklin recruiting fan. I think what he's going to do as far as elevating the program in that regard is really, really key. Not only for Virginia Tech, right? Because they need better players, like you talked about, to kind of impact their roster and move it in the right direction. But man, for the ACC, having a Virginia Tech program that is committed to playing the recruiting game at a high level, like we've seen some of these other schools do it, it's been something that probably on your end you could speak more to, but it's not that they haven't been committed. It's just not that level of commitment now that they've announced and pushed forward in this new era of college football. Let's go to that revenue sharing, the financial commitment, the NIL piece. obviously James Franklin to take this job, and his goal, and he said it on College Game Day, is to go somewhere he could win his national championship and go take that step. He takes the Virginia Tech job with this new, gluttony of resources that they've been talking about. How important has that change been, and where have you seen some of that impact, maybe away from recruiting, as you're starting to follow transfer portal and these staff changes that are coming about?
Well, Billy, the biggest news of this week, as we speak on Thursday morning, is on Monday afternoon. Virginia Tech announced a $20 million donation. That's the James Franklin impact a little bit. It's not all on him, of course, but when you can go and get a $20 million donation, that is the biggest athletics donation ever in Virginia Tech history, and it was from an anonymous donor. That's the kind of impact we're talking about. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's great for the ACC. The Hokies, Miami, you need some of those brands to be really, really good again. I think it will only continue to elevate the league. And I'm excited to see next year. Virginia Tech has, the ACC just revealed next year's schedule, or the opponents, I should say. And the Hokies have a lot of really good teams on there. Travel to SMU. I'm excited to go to Dallas and see the Mustangs. Miami's on the schedule. Clemson's on the schedule. Hokies play some really good teams next season. And James Franklin's going to have to assemble a roster worthy enough. But I think you've just seen Virginia Tech's investment level go up, and that's important if you're going to court a coach like James Franklin. I was speaking with one of the Board of Visitors members, Jay Pearson, Virginia Tech Board of Visitors member. He was on the committee that hired James Franklin. He told me that they went and met him at his lake house in Georgia, and when they showed up, he had a whole thing of notes basically printed out their presentation to the Board of Visitors presentation where they approved this giant increase in money. He had printed it out and detailed notes on it. And this was about a week and a half after being fired from Penn State. He had already done all of his research on Virginia Tech and the plan and what the investment was going to look like. That's pretty ridiculous for a coach who was so committed to Penn State for a dozen years and then gets fired out of the blue. And all of a sudden he's ready for Virginia Tech. I think that's when the Board of Visitors and that committee, they knew that, hey, James Franklin's legit. He really wants to come to Virginia Tech. And they just had to iron out a lot of details. But I'm very excited to see where this goes because, Billy, this is a Virginia Tech program that has historically been fun to watch, been great under Frank Beamer. You go back for so many years, and it's kind of fallen off over the last decade. The last time the Hokies were really nationally relevant was probably 2016 or 2017. That's a long time ago in college football. But as we've seen with a variety of schools, look at Vanderbilt, look at Indiana, it can be done. A turnaround can happen. You just have to have the right resources, the right funding in place, and you have to have the right coach. And I think Virginia Tech is on track to doing that, but they're going to have to make a lot of headway in the transfer portal, and I'm curious to see how that process goes.
When you look at the offensive side of the ball, Kyron Drones and just kind of the struggles that I think Virginia Tech has had, watching them from afar this season, it just seems like that is the area that I think, especially in that area of the country where I feel like there's kind of sneakily so much good skill talent, so much fun kind of skill players that you can get in recruiting and things like that. And you see them go elsewhere a lot, or you see some of these national brands come into that area and just grab them. Virginia Tech would love to keep them here and revitalize that offense a bit. What can you say about the future of the offensive side of the ball under James Franklin and how they can make this a fun, exciting offensive attack to come and join where it just hasn't been that way? I mean, I'm scrolling up and down the schedule for Virginia Tech, and I don't think they scored more than 30 points once in ACC play.
No, they didn't. And that's kind of the story of last season for the Hokies. They never quite figured it out under Brent Pry, I should say. The offense had its ups and downs at times, but they never figured out really how to operate. They had a lot of good talent. You had Jalen Lane. He had a punt return for a touchdown for the Washington Commanders over the weekend. He was one of their big time receivers last year. But you look at this Virginia Tech schedule, I mean, they struggled to score the ball this year. They did well against Cal. That was and NC State. Those were their 2 games, but those were both with Philip Montgomery, an interim head coach. Brent Pry, he never quite figured out some things, including the offensive line, and quarterback was always hit or miss. The Hokies didn't have a guy who could throw it around the yard. They had a guy who was a run-first quarterback. And when you have that, but don't have the structure set up to support that, makes it a little bit difficult. Kyron Drones, he played his heart out for Virginia Tech, but just wasn't the right fit. And I'd be interested, James Franklin's talked about this, about, hey, we want to be more spread it out, more exciting offense. He has to go get a quarterback. Is that Ethan Grunkemeyer from Penn State, who played a little bit at the end of the season after Franklin left because Drew Aller was hurt? Is it someone from somewhere else? The world is kind of Tech's oyster, I think, in all of this. You've got to go get a quarterback, but the offensive staff seems to already be assembled. He's bringing Ty Howell, the tight ends coach from Penn State, to be the offensive coordinator. Danny O'Brien, the quarterbacks coach from Penn State, is coming to be the quarterbacks coach here. He's bringing in Norval McKenzie, the running backs coach from Georgia Tech, as his running backs coach, and he's retaining Fontel Mines and Matt Moore at wide receivers and offensive line, respectively. So how that staff, really good recruiting staff, how they get these players in the program, specifically quarterbacks and other skilled talent, is going to be really interesting. And I think you saw that. You talk about talent in this area of the country. A lot of these guys the Hokies lost over the years, Billy, it was to Penn State. And now they've got James Franklin in the fold. I think a lot of them hope that their fortunes can change a little bit now with James Franklin as the guy recruiting for them instead of against them.
And defensively, what changes do you think Brent Pry brings? And then we'll get you out of here and maybe ask you one more about kind of what's next for James Franklin. But Brent Pry, do you see him changing a huge amount? Or I don't think the defense was too much of an issue. It's just, again, kind of a personnel thing.
Yeah, I didn't think it was too bad. I think the problem with the defense was, to be honest with you, he appointed a first-time defensive coordinator in Chris Marv out of the gate. I mean, if you want to talk about where the Brent Pry era went wrong, he was a first-time head coach who hired a first-time offensive and first-time defensive coordinator. That just rookie mistakes across the board. James Franklin is not that, and even though he has promoted a rookie, offensive coordinator, he's a guy who he's trusted for a very long time at Penn State. A little bit different than Pry bringing in Chris Marv. I think he'll change a little bit defensively. I think the biggest thing is that Brent Pry just never quite figured out everything about how to be a head coach. Like, great person, great guy who built up relationships, cultivated a good culture, but he just never did all the nitty-gritty stuff as a head coach. It was always tough for him, I think, to balance everything on his plate. I think he's really well suited for a defensive coordinator role, which he did under James Franklin, again, at Vandy and Penn State. And I'm interested to see when we get a chance to talk to him, which might be a little bit awkward given the last time we talked to him was before he got fired. He's back now. And I think he'll change some stuff, but I think he'll be in a more of a relaxed role where he's just free to coordinate a defense. I genuinely think that's what he loves doing most, getting in the nitty-gritty stuff. I don't think he enjoyed as much being a head coach as he thought he would like because, yes, it's at a school that he loves, but at the same time, man, you don't get to do the game planning stuff necessarily. You got coaching assistants for that, right? You've got to kind of handle the donor relations and overseeing the roster. And I think he just wants to coach ball. And I think you'll see that in Pry. I think he'll be re-energized as he coaches this Virginia Tech defense. But I'm interested to see how they fill out the rest of this coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball. And also, Pry as a recruiter, Pry and Franklin together. Who do they go get? What kind of talent do they go get on the defensive side of the ball? I think that will tell you a lot about where this team is headed into 2026.
We'll get you out of here on this. What's next for James Franklin? What are some of his goals that he has to accomplish between now and spring ball with what pertains to the transfer portal in large part?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is they've got to restructure this roster entirely. And my guess is that they will probably bring in, I would say, 30 players at least. I think this is the day and age you're living in where you're going out, especially when you're hiring somebody who was just previously out of school. I think James Franklin's going to bring in a bunch of players, probably a chunk of them from Penn State. Um, you've got to completely rebuild this thing. And you saw how well James Franklin did as a recruiter when he was recruiting for the Hokies leading up to signing day. I think this is a big opportunity to completely flip everything the week before or leading up to the 2026 season. And I say that because I know they've already been having conversations behind the scenes with players about, should I stay, should I go, that kind of stuff. Those tough conversations they talk about. It'll be very interesting to see what kind of roster decisions are made, what kind of guys portal out. At the same time, I expect them to get down and dirty and get a lot of these portal kids into the program because they have to completely revamp this thing. There is talent again in certain areas on this team, but not everywhere and not enough. And you look at quarterback, the offensive line is bad. The defensive line needs some work, especially with some of the guys they lost to graduation. So there's a lot of work to be done. The biggest thing is he's got the resources, man. He's got the resources to go and get pretty much whoever he wants. And Virginia Tech hasn't really been able to say that before. And when it has, it's been recruiting against James Franklin. Now James Franklin is on the Hokies side. And I think he's got to finish rounding out his staff hirings. And I think some of these coaches that he's looking to get are still coaching in bowl games, maybe in the playoff. But I'm interested to kind of see once that January portal window opens where things go because that will make or break Virginia Tech's season. And I think that will be James Franklin at his best, recruiting, getting guys to Virginia Tech. I think he's already got a bunch from Penn State lined up, to be totally honest with you. And I am interested to just see how this whole thing shakes out because I think when we look at this Virginia Tech roster in April, it will look completely different than it does right now.
Incredible stuff, David Cunningham. Thanks so much from Tech Sideline joining us on All Access AM. We're so pumped to have had you join the show. We're really excited to have you back. We'll check in with you during the transfer portal whirlwind that we're all getting ready for in January.
Much appreciated, man. This was awesome, and thanks for having me on.
Of course. There he goes. David Cunningham kicking off your morning with an inside look at the Virginia Tech program under James Franklin. Just fascinating stuff there. I am really intrigued to see how it goes. I grew up, in the era that David Cunningham kind of mentioned when it came to Virginia Tech's ability to be a national brand. I remember one of my early college football memories is Michael Vick. And I mean, everybody knows that and what they were able to do with him as the quarterback at Virginia Tech and turning into a star in the NFL. I watched him with the Falcons and obviously everything that went on with his career. But Virginia Tech under Frank Beamer had just such a history of being that standard of college football, and even the Tyrod Taylor days and things like that. They've always just been this program that, for the ACC in particular, they need to be a brand, and you can see now that they're investing and they're getting back on that right footing when it comes to that. So again, awesome stuff from David Cunningham. We really want to obviously get James Franklin on at some point, or somebody to talk about the rebuild that's going on at Virginia Tech. But great stuff from David Cunningham. We'll end with the rest of our college football playoff bracket in just a second, but do want to share with you guys about our friends at Socorro Tequila. This holiday season, make sure you're surrounded by an award-winning tequila. You can make some of their great cocktails as well and really impress your family, your friends at your next holiday party. The Espresso Martinez on their cocktails page uses their Socorro Reposado, and I've tried that. You have a little Jalisco liqueur in it, the 1562 orange, and then a espresso shot. espresso martinis are all the rage. Everybody knows that. You can also do an old fashioned, which is cozy and great for this time of year. And they offer up those for you to try and get around their tequila because they believe in it. And it's just agave, water, and yeast. It's really clean, great tequila. Free shipping on 3 bottles or more when you go to SocorroTequila.com. So, great opportunity for you guys to try Socorro tequila during this holiday season. So, please check them out. Appreciate their support of All Access AM. And look, let's end on this. The college football playoff, rest of my bracket predictions and how this thing is going to go. I am not necessarily torn on who the college football playoff champion is that I'm going to pick, but I am going to go with not the number 1 seed. I'm picking some other team to jump into this one, but I do have Miami pulling the upset, just barely, 24-20 over Texas A&M to advance to face Ohio State. You then have Indiana versus Oklahoma. Let's start at the top. I think the way that Oklahoma plays football matches up really well against Indiana. And the way Indiana and Ohio State played football in that Big Ten championship really stands out to me as far as what the style of that type of a game can be in the Rose Bowl. I'm half inclined to go with Oklahoma. I think they can keep that Indiana offense to around that 10, 15, 10 to 13, 10 to 14 point range that Ohio State was for a large part of the game, kind of keeping them around and being in that situation where it is just a knockdown, drag out game that went 13-10 to Indiana. And Ohio State had opportunities. They had their chances to really step up and win that game at various points. And I think Oklahoma, the way they play that game, they're going to be fine with that, just like they're going to be fine if that's the style of game that they play against Alabama at home. I will pick Oklahoma to advance. I don't have Oklahoma winning a national championship, but I can absolutely see Oklahoma beating Indiana and in a 17-10 kind of similar fashion that they do against Alabama. This is going to be a beautiful setting out in the Rose Bowl. Great opportunity for this Oklahoma team in a neutral site to go out there and go get a win. And I just see that happening. I don't know what it is. I love what Kirk Cignetti and that Indiana team has done. I don't think the first round bye helps. I just don't. And I think you're going to see that in this college football playoff hit home a lot. And it's not that it's a team coming off a game just a week before. It's going to be 10, 11 days for most of these teams between their games, but it matters, and for these teams that play in the first round of games, all of them outside of Alabama haven't played in a championship game. Well, Tulane did, I guess, and James Madison did, but no offense to them, I don't think they're going to be involved very long, and it's not really going to help them. So they're going to kind of play this just perfectly amount of keep your edge, hot and sharp and ready to roll. And I think Oklahoma's going to win. And then I think when you flip over to the other matchup, you go 1-4, Texas Tech facing off against Oregon in the Orange Bowl. I know it's a long way to travel for Oregon, but I just think that Oregon team is well equipped to slow down Texas Tech enough. I think this is going to be a defensive struggle. I think Oregon is going to come out on top here, and they're going to advance to the Peach Bowl in this case. And they would face the winner of Indiana, Oklahoma, which I have Oklahoma. So Oklahoma, Oregon, I have Oregon being able to play that game just a little bit better. Both of those teams want to play the game in a similar way, very strong defensively, physical, all those things. That would be an absolute blast of a football game to watch in the Peach Bowl. I see Oregon on that turf with a little bit of speed going, just enough with DeCorian Moore and that group of studs that they have. I see Oregon winning against Oklahoma and advancing to the national championship game in Miami. Let's go over to the other side of the bracket, though. Okay, so Oregon beating Oklahoma in the Peach Bowl in Atlanta on that January 9th matchup. You go over to the other side of the bracket to find out who they're going to play. Ole Miss taking on Tulane. We already picked Ole Miss to beat Tulane. a rematch in the All-State Sugar Bowl on January 1st, 7 p.m. of Ole Miss, Georgia from earlier this year. A game that Ole Miss 100% should have won earlier this year. They were up a couple scores. They were in Athens. They kind of had the dogs on their heels, but you can't let up and get comfortable against this Georgia team. And boy, does part of me want to say Ole Miss is going to do it and win because they really should have earlier this year. But I just think Kirby now has his team rolling in the right direction. And Georgia has a way of kind of feeling it this time of year. And I I'm just going to pick Georgia because I'm going to take an easy out and say, you know what? They did win earlier this year. You've got to give them credit. They kind of woke up and were able to control the game. The way they've been playing over the last month of the season and in the SEC championship game, that stands out to me. Now, long layoff. Will Georgia be ready to rock and roll like an Ole Miss team who will have at least played a football game 10, 11 days earlier will be for this type of a game? I like Georgia. I think they're very comfortable in who they are now. I think Gunnar Stockton's settled in, and I'm not the big Gunnar Stockton guy. I could see Georgia winning that one kind of like a 30, 32, 24 type of a game, just large enough where you're like, ooh, Georgia did it again. They're just on cruise control. You get to Miami, Ohio State. And I love the matchup from the perspective of Jeremiah Smith and this Ohio State wide receiver core going up against this Miami secondary. Who can get pressure? Who can turn this game into kind of that Ohio State Texas battle from early in the season? Which team can then take care of the football at a high level? Which team wants to play that physical, style of game to control the clock and do all these things? Man, so difficult to pick this one. Probably out of the 4 games in the quarterfinals on my bracket, the most difficult one to pick for me. But I'm going to go with Ohio State again. And it'd be a Georgia Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl, just a mega matchup. And I'm going to like that. They might not be as talented as Ohio State, truly, but I like Gunnar Stockton and this Georgia team to kind of have that little bit of a, pep in their step, like a swagger to them, where I think Ohio State is just kind of cruise the entire year. And maybe contrary to last year, maybe they're just not going to finish like they did. This year they came into the Big Ten championship game with a win over Michigan. They came into last year's with, dirt in their face and been kicked and punched and been down and been talked trash about. And then their roster woke up and said, hey, we're all pretty good. Let's go win a national championship. I don't know if they have that this year. That would leave Georgia facing Oregon in the national championship. And I have Georgia coming out on top in that one. I just think the dogs just too much this time of year, the way they're playing. We'll see. If I would say this, the team that I think could also make a run to maybe play for a national championship, don't count out Ole Miss. They do love themselves some Pete Golding down there in Oxford. And if they have that entire staff available and Charlie Weiss Jr. calling plays and things like that, maybe they just have it. Maybe they have it enough to make enough plays offensively and kind of be that, ragtag group, D2 quarterback coming into Oxford and becoming a star and things like that. And rectifying their loss to Georgia earlier this year, and then able to play Ohio State and say, you know what, we can get some different things with Kejuan Lacey and control the game in that regard. But I don't necessarily think that happens. It just wouldn't shock me if there's that one. It wouldn't shock me team, be Ole Miss. I've got Georgia beating Oregon as far as my national championship goes, but a fun bracket, I think. So we don't have the visuals yet. I'm still working on my graphic design skills to bring you some of that type of stuff, guys. But look, we appreciate you guys listening. Horn Legend sponsors the Thursday show. Make sure you guys get suited up the right way for the holiday season with our friends at Horn Legend and be sipping on some Socorro tequila cocktails when you do it. So we appreciate you guys for listening to All Access AM. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, scan the QR code that's on your screen now. I'll leave it up for a couple more seconds, but we hope you guys have a fantastic weekend watching the college football playoff and breaking, in your new Sakura tequila cocktails that you have on hand and trying those out, because it is that time of year where the holidays are here and football is on TV. So hope you guys enjoy it. We'll be back Monday. We'll obviously recap Texas A&M, Miami. We'll see. Maybe the Hurricanes will still be playing some football. Maybe the Texas A&M Aggies will be celebrating a win, but we'll find out. We'll also talk a lot about some ACC basketball matchups this weekend as well. So make sure you guys are subscribed. Scan that QR code to go right to the All Access AM YouTube channel, or type in All Access AM on YouTube and go subscribe to our channel, please. We're about 211 subscribers, hoping to get to 300 maybe. Shock us by the end of the year. But let's keep it rolling, guys. We appreciate all of you guys listening and chiming in the chat. So hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll catch you next time on All Access AM.